أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وأن عليا ولي الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. أستغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سميع على لمن حمد. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمدي. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سميع على لمن حمد. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأركع وأسجد. سبحان الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. أستغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. سميع على لمن حمده. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف.
الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله والحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى ذريته وعلى أهل بيته. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة والرضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وآله السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك، لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. صلوات.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وأن عليا حجة الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة. قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. أستغفر الله من كل ذنب وأتوب إليه إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع له لمن حمده. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد أركع وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. اللهم اجعل عواقب أمورنا خيرا يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
سمع له لمن حمد. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله والحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. والسلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. إنه ليس لي علم بموضع رزقي، وإنما أطلبه بخطرات تخطر على قلبي، فأجول في طلبه البلدان، فأنا فيما أنا طالب كالحيران. لا أدري أفي سهل هو أم في جبل، أم في أرض أم في سماء، أم في بر أم في بحر، وعلى يدي من ومن قبل من. وقد علمت أن علمه عندك وأسبابه بيدك، وأنت الذي تقسمه بلطفك وتسببه برحمتك. اللهم فصل على محمد وآله، واجعل يا ربي رزقك لي واسعة، ومطلبه سهلا، ومأخذه قريبا، ولا تعنني بطلب ما لم تقدر لي فيه رزقا، فإنك غني عن عذابي، وأنا فقير إلى رحمتك. فصل على محمد وآله، وجد على عبدك بفضلك، إنك ذو فضل عظيم. صلوات.
Inshallah, ziyarat will be recited after the program. Let us now get ready to begin the program with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Bar Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. We are beginning tonight's program with the recitation of the Holy Quran. I would like to request Brother Michael to please come forward and recite the Holy Quran for us with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli.
الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب، ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن سبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على. Can I recite the English really quick? The English really quick? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In English. Piety is not to turn your faces toward the east or the west. Rather, piety is personified by those who have faith. Those who have faith in Allah and the last day, the angels, the book, and the prophets, and those who give their wealth for the love of Him to relatives, orphans, the needy, the traveler, and the beggar, and for the freeing of slaves. And those who maintain the prayer and give zakat, and those who fulfill their covenants when they pledge themselves, and those who are patient in stress and distress, and in the heat of battle. They are the ones who are true to their covenant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is they who are the God-wary. Sadaqallahu al-Ali al-Azim.
Jazakallah, Brother Michael, for that beautiful recitation. One more loud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. I would now like to request Brother Ali Rizvi to come forward to recite some poetry with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah.
Baba, hold me close. I am all alone. Don't you let me go. Don't you let me go. In the land of Karbala is the day of Ashura, where the family of the Prophet became all shuhada. In the middle of the camp is a daughter of Hussein, looking for some water to quench her brother's vein. In the middle of the camp is a daughter of Hussein, looking at the plains where her brothers lay slain. Baba, hold me close. I am all alone. Don't you let me go. Don't you let me go. Next to the river of Furat is the body of Abbas, arms cutting off. Hussein gives a response. My back's finally broken. Oh Lord, do you see the sacrifice we made? And the way they made us bleed from rocks, spears, and arrows. They never held back as one evil man gives Sakina a slap. Baba, hold me close. I am all alone. Don't you let me go. Don't you let me go. In chains towards the prison, I can't explain the horrors from their families' heads on spears. They endured so much torture, dragged to the court of Yazid. Zainab stands to speak and mentions all the pain and all the cruelty. How they snatched at their cloaks and burned their tents. How they sat on Hussein's chest and then cut off his neck. Baba, hold me close. I am all alone. Don't you let me go. Don't you let me go. Before setting off for the battle against the enemies of Islam, Hussein turns to the tents to give final salams. As he approaches, the children storm the horses and find Zuljana and stop his advances. Hussein looks down to find his daughter by his side, with tears running down her face. She says to him in stride, Baba, hold me close. I am all alone. Don't you let me go. Don't you let me go. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Jazakallah, Brother Ali, that was beautiful. One more loud salawat, please. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. بے خطا مارا گیا سبت رسول دو سرا و حسن سبز قبا بے خطا مارا گیا سبت رسول دو سرا و حسن سبز قبا زہر سے ٹکڑے جگر خون سے کفن لال ہوا و حسن سبز قبا خون اگلتے ہوئے بھائی کو بہن نے دیکھا اور تڑپ کر یہ کہا تیری غربت پہ اے بھائی تیری زینب ہو فدا و حسن سبز قبا بے خطا مارا گیا سبت رسول دو سرا و حسن سبز قبا گھر سے ایک بار جنازہ جو نکل جاتا ہے کب وہ پھر آتا ہے یہ وہ تابوت ہے جو لوٹ کے گھر کو آیا و حسن سبز قبا بے خطا مارا گیا سبت رسول دو سرا و حسن سبز قبا ماں کے دکھ سے ابھی آزاد کہاں تھی زینب ہو گیا کیسا غضب باپ زندہ نہ رہا بھائی سوئے خلد چلا و حسن سبز قبا بے خطا مارا گیا سبت رسول دو سرا و حسن سبز قبا شہ نے اس وقت جو غازی کو نہ روکا ہوتا حشر ہو جاتا بپا تیر آتے نہ جنازے پہ تمہارے مولا و حسن سبز قبا بے خطا مارا گیا سبت رسول دو سرا و حسن سبز قبا کر دیے زہر حلاحل نے جگر کے ٹکڑے اور قاسم کے لیے सीनी में है ये गम शामे गरीबां जैसा वाह हसन सब्ज़ क़बा बेख़ता मारा गया सिबते रसूले दो सरा वाह हसन सब्ज़ क़बा शह को रेहान बरादर का जिगर याद आया जब सरे कर बो बला जब सरे कर बो बला टुकड़े कासिम के उठाते हुए मौला ने कहा वाह हसन सब्ज़ क़बा बेख़ता मारा गया सिबते रसूले दो सरा वाह हसन सब्ज़ क़बा ज़हर से टुकड़े जिगर खून से कफन लाल हुआ वाह हसन सब्ज़ क़बा पर मोहम्मद वाल मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु One more salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Respected Sheikh, elders, brothers and sisters in faith, Assalamu alaikum. My condolences to all Mu'mineen. May our modest offerings be accepted in Bargah Imam Zamana Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. And that we are enlightened and are better Shias by following the teachings and understanding the sacrifices made by the Holy Prophet and his Ahl Bayt alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Alhamdulillah, once again we are honored to host you, Sayyid Hasan Ali Rizvi from Orlando. Jazakallah for accepting our invitation once again. Before I request the Sayyid to begin his speech, a couple of announcements. Regarding registration, our objective at CFK is to serve all our guests adequately while being morally responsible by minimizing wastage. We thank you for doing your part in helping us achieve this objective and pre-registering using the links present on all our WhatsApp and email announcements. We also require your help to maintain our tradition of no active fundraising during the Muharram programs. Please consider sponsoring and becoming sustaining members with recurring monthly contributions. Look for QR codes pasted on the walls, and these links are also present on our webpage, cfkdfw.org. A quick reminder about masks. After consultation with health experts, face masks are no longer mandatory for in-person programs at CFK. However, attendees and volunteers are encouraged to wear masks, especially if they feel unwell. As always, all our announcements are present on our WhatsApp groups and are present on our webpage, cfkdfw.org, where you can sign up for our newsletters as well and find the QR code to join our WhatsApp group and donate and sponsor nights like these. For opportunities to help behind the scenes, or if you have any questions, please speak to myself or any of the other existing volunteers. Let us now recite a Surah Fatiha for the marhumin of tonight's sponsors. In honor of marhum Sayyid Hussain Ali Khan and the marhumin of Sister Nazim Razvi and family, let us please all include all our marhumin and the marhumin of the Ummah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. I will now humbly request the Sayyid to please come to the minbar with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala
صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا والنبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد صل على محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll do a short recap from what we started to discuss last night. We introduced the idea of talking about grand personalities. Like when we talk about our Holy Prophet, we use these larger-than-life terms, as he deserves. But sometimes what ends up happening is when we conceive of the Prophet and all these personalities in such grandiose scales, it makes us think that everything we need to do also needs to be larger than life and big, right? These giant projects. And sometimes we take on more than we can handle. So we gave this idea that the reason that those big changes that the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt were able to make, why they were able to transform cultures and civilizations, was because of small, grassroots, incremental changes, one-on-one private changes. And we wanted to describe that, or try to prove that, through one specific story. And we started to discuss when the Prophet was in the Medinan phase, that there was this couple of Juwaybir and Dhalfa who eventually got married, and we started to discuss their story. And again, I'll quickly recap. Juwaybir was somebody who was a Sudanese convert, right? He was from Yamama. He had heard about the message as he was traveling around, but he was somebody that didn't have income, he didn't have a job, so he became part of the Ashab al-Suffa, people who pretty much stayed in the masjid because they didn't, they were homeless. And there was 300-400 people in Medina who are like that, who were just living in the masjid. The Prophet would frequent them. At one point, the Prophet came, advised Juwaybir to get married. Juwaybir replied that, look, I'm short, I'm ugly, I don't have money, who am I going to get married to? Prophet said, no, Islam came and changed all the stuff, right? Get this negativity out of here. He ordered him to go meet Ziyad ibn Labid, one of the heads of the tribes of Bayada, somebody well known. He said, I'm giving you a message, go tell Ziyad, I'm saying, Ziyad, Rasulullah is ordering you to marry your daughter, Dhalfa, to this person, right, Juwaybir. He's reluctant, but he goes. He gives the message. Ziyad's like, I don't think so. We don't do like Ansar. People from Medina don't marry like this. It's strange. Let me go figure out what Rasulullah actually said to you. As Juwaybir is walking out and leaving, he mumbles and complains, basically. Dhalfa, the daughter, he overhears the complaints, goes to her father and says, what you did was incorrect. The Prophet gave you an order. You need to follow it. You need to marry me off to him. So Ziyad sent somebody after Juwaybir, came back, he apologized, said, yes, I'll marry you off. Beyond that, I will pay for your mahr because I know you can't pay it. Beyond that, I'll buy both of you a house, and beyond that, I'll furnish the house for you. Right, so happily ever after. There's actually more to the story, but I'm going to cut out the rest of the story. It actually is an interesting story, but the rest, if you guys are interested, you can go research on your own. So over here, story for us at least ended, and then we started to analyze. So we asked the question, like, okay, in this whole little episode, who was really not the
bad guy, but like who's the antagonist, so to speak? Who's the person causing the problems? We all guess it's Ziyad, this racist guy, whatever, who's not marrying off his daughter to this poor homeless guy. And we said, no, it's actually not Ziyad who started this off. It was Juwaybir himself with his negativity and his pessimism. We brought in a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Where he's reported to have said that there's two qualities that you'll never find in a mu'min: bukhl, being stingy, and su'adhan bil rizq, having this negative perception in terms of one's rizq. Rizq, of course, we know, not simply limited to money, not just finances, but it has to do with health. It has to do with family. It has to do with marriage. A lot of different things, right? So we said this was Juwaybir's problem, right? He was there, but he had this negative outlook. And we talked about how, perhaps why this is being mentioned by the Prophet as being, one of the two major issues that a mu'min can't have, because we said there's two levels. One level is that when you have this su'adhan, this negativity about rizq, it's not just you being negative about rizq itself, it's you being negative about mu'mineen and mu'minat, saying, my community members, they're not in a position to take care of me. They're not doing their duty. That's what you're really saying. And that was, lesser. And that was, lesser of all evils. The real evil, the bigger mistake, the bigger problem was that this person is believing that Allah is not khairur raziqeen, that Allah is not ar-razaq, ar-raziq, which is a big issue. When Allah himself has promised that everybody gets exactly what they need to achieve their personal kamal, their perfection. A person who has that su'adhan, that negativity, is saying, no, Allah, you're not giving me what I need. And that's a huge, huge problem in our aqeedah, right? In our iman, in our spirituality. So this is perhaps why Rasulullah is saying you should never find this sort of quality in a mu'min. So this was the first analysis. Then we said, okay, now let's go to Ziyad. He refused. We said, okay, that's a very clear, obvious problem. He shouldn't have done that. So obviously over here, we expected the conversation to be about Islam's against racism. He was being racist. So I want to open that conversation up a little bit because I don't think it's as simple as that. I don't think it was just a case, send a salawat, we'll discuss more. For some reason, I don't know if it's just being here in the West or it's just kind of recent social justice, woke movements or what it is, but it's almost like every single problem that we encounter now, everything we analyze in our communities or in Islamic history gets like this thing of racism attached to it. I'll give an example. When you ask, or when some speakers analyze the story of Shaitan, right, Iblis, what was his mistake? What was his sin? People say he was a racist. That was his problem. Yes, you should be laughing. People hear it like, yeah, he was a racist. Like, hold on. He wasn't wearing like robes and saying down with humans and, jinn supremacy or something like that. That's not what he was doing, right? And if you're going to call him a racist, then you should call the angels a racist too. The angels are also saying that, hey, these human beings, they shouldn't be a khalifa. We do a better job, right? Angels who are pure aql, pure intellect, they were saying, Allah, what are you doing making this, pile of dirt and clay, this creation that is going to lead to fasad? We know that they can do fasad. How they knew that? Again, longer conversation. But the angels were saying, God, questioning at least, right? What's going on here? Shaitan is doing the same thing. He's saying, what's going on over here? It's a rational decision that he's making, a rational sort of conclusion that, look, I'm clearly made of better materials. I've been doing more ibadah. You're just making this thing out of dirt and clay, and he's going to be the khalifa? That's really strange. Very, very strange, right? But people say, no, he was being racist. Like, what do you mean? There's no such thing as racism there. It's like a very sort of modern way of approaching these things. So I don't want to get into that story, but sometimes we end up superimposing our ideas and problems and notions that we are dealing with right now, and we toss it back on everything in the Quran and in the Hadith, and that's how it is. But even if you take a very honest and simple analysis of the story, he wasn't really being racist. Ziyad wasn't being racist. I don't believe so. He was simply saying that, look, the Ansar, our tribe, the way that we engage in marriage, the way we do things, it's one thing. And where you come from, your tribe, well, it's something different. He's like, it's not going to work. And there's actually historical precedence to this too. If you remember, right, one of the marriages that Rasulullah himself had set up was between Zayd and Zainab bint Jahsh, right? She's Rasulullah's cousin. he set up that marriage. And what was the thing there? Zainab was, right, somebody from an elite tribe. She was wealthy, upper class. And obviously Zayd was somebody who came into Islam and didn't have much. But Rasulullah set it up. It didn't work out well, right? They just couldn't get along. So after the divorce happened, then Rasulullah himself married Zainab afterwards, right? And there's many reasons for why, but sometimes that sort of social clash, it doesn't really work. So there is some sort of precedence to that. So we can't call Ziyad like a racist for saying that, no, maybe the cultures are not going to work out here. And think about it for ourselves, because this conversation comes up in terms of marriage and things like that. Some people say, no, we should stick to our culture, at least keep it on the priority list. Because it's obviously easy, right? If somebody from one culture marries somebody from another culture, there may be issues. It's not a completely foolish thing to say. It doesn't mean it's a deal breaker, but it's something worth considering, right? I don't know if that goes under the title of racism, just a practical thing. Especially if, let's say, there are elders in one's family and they only speak a certain language and things like that, it can be very difficult to connect. Again, it's not a deal breaker, and it shouldn't be a deal breaker, but it's something worth considering. And it seems like that's what Ziyad is saying. It's like, no, well, because it doesn't really make sense. And he didn't outright say no either. He's just saying, hey, you know what, let me go talk to Rasulullah, maybe I can explain it better to him. So maybe at face value, again, it doesn't seem like racism, but I think it is something else, which is still a problem on Ziyad's part. It's the fact that he had Islamic belief system. He had an Islamic belief system. He was a practicing Muslim. Remember, Rasulullah is telling Juwaybir, go to Ziyad because he's a good practicing mu'min. Rasulullah is not sending him to some average guy. This is a recommendation from the Prophet. So now go to this guy, he'll take care of you. But he doesn't. So Ziyad was seen as somebody who was, shouldn't have this issue in his heart. But even though he had this Islamic belief system, he had a level of practice, it was mixed with a little bit of extra stuff. A little bit of tribalism, culturalism, whatever you want to call it. There's something still within him that clashed with his Islamic identity. And this is a conversation that comes up all the time, right? Is where we have religion versus culture, or people being born and raised here. We have these, identity crisis. Like, this is a constant conversation that's happening. So normally here, like we were alluding to last night, normally the conversation is, what happens is that, those of us now, we're in the West and we're trying to establish these Islamic communities with a real, true Islamic culture, and these uncles and aunties come with their Eastern culture and they mess everything up. So all the youth come, they say, get culture out of religion. That's the way the conversation goes. And a lot of the times, sometimes that is accurate, where, a lot of cultural things do end up causing problems. I'll give one example, if you can send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. First, the disclaimer. Look, Islam doesn't just offer up a way for it to express itself on its own. Islam happens through culture. That's the way it works. Islam happens through specific languages, through specific styles. Right? Islam was spread through Arabic. That doesn't mean all of us need to learn and start speaking Arabic, for example, right? And speak whatever language is necessary. It's fine. Right? That's a cultural thing. The way that, we mentioned this last night, the way that many of our communities perform azadari, the way that we have our majalis, every single culture among Shias, there's slight little, variations. I was mentioning to two brothers this afternoon, I grew up in a Desi environment with Desi majalis, where when you're sitting in a majlis, no food, no drink, focus on the majlis, that's pretty much it, right? When, the first time when I went to a majlis, I think this is like when we had first arrived in Qum. Went to a majlis, and in the middle of the majlis, I see somebody going around, passing around chai. Not our chai, their chai, Iranian chai, right? Which is water, whatever it is. A lot of water, with a little bit of tea in it. So he's walking around and passing all this stuff, and then he has a bowl of qand, right? Which is these sugar cubes. He's passing that around. So I'm looking, I'm like, Bisharam, what are you doing, man? Passing around chai in the middle of the majlis, and then after that, then he starts passing around dates. I'm like, what is going on here? Oh man, if the auntie saw this, the uncle saw this, then they'd shut this down. Like in our majlis, you can't even be chewing gum, and they're passing around chai and sweets and dates. I'm like, this is so strange. But that was normal for them. And those of you who have been to some Arab majalis, they pass around, some other things too, which I don't want to encourage necessarily, but other things to keep the crowd engaged. We'll put it that way, right? So every culture seems to be a little different in the way that they have majalis. So I couldn't superimpose my ideas. I'm like, look, I came from one background. This is how they do it. Okay, interesting. So, I kind of learned and expanded. Now, the problem is, look, we can explain it and we can express Islam and Azadari in many different ways. And that's fine, that's great, it's wonderful. The problem is that when we let our understanding or our interpretation or our expression become an idol in and of itself. So let me give you a contemporary example. One that I think should hit home because I'm going to talk about your home right here. So over last week, Arba'een, right? Last weekend. Sheikh Mehdi, what did he talk about? What was his topic last week? Islam's take on music, right? Wonderful topic, I heard, right? I only listened to the first part. I didn't listen to the second part yet. And, from whatever feedback that I heard from various individuals, it was amazing, right? He went and approached the topic from a lot of different areas. What's interesting is that some individuals came to me and they were like, what's going on? Arba'een? Talking about music? This is disrespectful. This is not correct. And I'm like, and I think Sheikh Mehdi even gave that disclaimer, I think, on the first night too, right? That was probably going to happen. But somebody, some people have in their mind, no, Arba'een, the only thing you can talk about is Masa'ib and that's it. But where did that come from though? If it's something that the Ahlul Bayt said, for example, that look, on Arba'een, you only talk about what we say. If that's there, then definitely, yeah, they have a point. But if that was there, I'm sure Sheikh Mehdi would have known about that, right? Probably. But it's interesting. I mean, when I was talking to, these individuals, they weren't uncles too. They were younger individuals, which I was really surprised about. Right? I don't know what generation they were, but millennial, maybe Gen Z, I'm not sure. Whatever they were. It was a little strange for me. I expected that from the, older generation. But this is like a young kid who was like, this is disrespectful. Like, what's disrespectful? He's coming and educating you on principles that the Ahlul Bayt have tried to educate you on, and it's a good topic. It's a necessary topic. Like, what a wonderful thing to address. And of course, he obviously did Masa'ib too, so that was there. But it was strange, right? Because this person now had this negative perception of Sheikh Mehdi, unfortunately, because of him addressing an Islamic topic in an Islamic majlis for the Ahlul Bayt. So sometimes, these kind of things happen. And, it's interesting. So the same thing happens, let's say, in the first 10 nights of Muharram, right? On Ashura. What are many of us used to? On Ashura, the day of Ashura, or night of Sham Ghariba, just Masa'ib. That's what most of us, I think, are used to, right? So, Asr Ashura, just Masa'ib. At night, Sham Ghariba, also, 20, 30 minutes, Masa'ib. That's usually it. Well, not every community does that. Many of them have the Maqtal in the afternoon. Not everybody has, let's say, a Sham Ghariba program, but those who do, I went to one center where they had a lecture, then they had the just normal Masa'ib afterwards. So again, the little desi boy in me is like, what is going on here? But I'm like, but is there actually an issue here? And it's tough to really think in those terms because when you're raised with a certain way for so long, you think that that's the only way possible. So part of you does get offended a little bit, but then you have to stop and say, okay, what am I really offended by here? What sensitivities do I have? Is it something that Allah has talked about in the Quran? Is it the Ahlul Bayt giving orders that's being disobeyed or disregarded? Or is it my own cultural sensitivities that are being changed? And Azadari is probably the main battlefield for all of this. I think many of us know that, right? Some communities, they do the Masa'ib of Hazrat Abbas on this night, others do it on another night. Some people want to do this alam or tabut or no tabut. Like there's all these little tiny things which we should realize are inconsequential, but it's amazing how quickly people get, blood red and angry and ready to fight people. And then really you ask them, say, look, you're doing all this for the love of Abu Abdullah Imam Hussein, right? Like that's what you're claiming. You're doing all of this azah, everything we're doing is for the love of Abu Abdullah. If that's the case, would you ever get angry and dispute and argue with the mu'min over azah? If that really was your goal, your maqsad, if you're really showing your love for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, would you really get angry or upset with somebody else who's showing that exact same love for Imam Hussein? Or is it really telling the story of what's going on inside of us that no, maybe my love is not for Imam Hussein, maybe it's for myself and the way that I love Imam Hussein. So maybe it's a bit of self-love, not love for Imam Hussein. And that's a tough thing to think about for ourselves. So over here, Ziyad probably still had a little bit of that love for his own cultural ideas and beliefs, and it was mixed in there, and it was a problem. And yes, with the advisement of Rasulullah, he was able to break it finally, alhamdulillah. But this idea is not just something historical, not just in the examples I gave, it even expresses itself in many other issues that we're facing in this day and age now. Not just, again, with azah, but in socio-political issues. Let me share one example. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The ayah that Brother Michael had recited was, alhamdulillah, it was on point, and it was related actually to the topic, and it didn't occur to me until he recited it. I heard it, and I said, you know what? It's related to the topic at hand, right? So let me go through it again, or just at least the beginning part. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is Surah Baqarah, ayah 177, right? لَيْسَ الْبِرَّ أَن تَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ قِبْلَ الْمَشْرِقِ وَالْمَغْرِبِ. Bir, goodness, piety, whatever, is not that you turn your face, that you orient yourself and you look at Mashriq or Maghrib, that you're looking at the east or west, right? What is it? What's true taqwa? What is true bir? What is it? وَلَكِنَ الْبِرْ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةِ وَالْكِتَابِ وَالنَّبِيِّينَ وَآتَى الْمَالِ, etc., etc. I don't want to go through the whole thing again, but he recited everything beautifully. So it said, look, it's not about bir, goodness, piety, is not looking at the east or west. It's focusing, having this iman in Allah, the Day of Judgment, the angels, the Prophet, the books, all of that stuff. Some of the mufassirin, when they offer their tafsir for this ayah, they say east and west have many different explanations and layers. One of them is geographical, and one of them is metaphorical or metaphysical. They said, look, east is a simple thing to explain. They say eastern, what it means to face the east, is that a person faces their own cultural identity. That a person, they turn their faces towards what they grew up with. That a person faces towards what they understand to be correct and true with this blind sense of iman. And they hold on to that like an idol. And they never turn away from it. Like many of people in Eastern society still do. We do it this way, Karachi, this is how we do it. Lucknow, this is how we do it. Hyderabad, this is how we do it. In this place in Shiraz, this is how we do it. And they stick with it and they're never going to break out of it. I've seen people tell Maulanas to their face. When the Maulana will give advice, he'll say, we should do this. He'll say, Maulana Sahab, this is how we do it in Hyderabad, so no thanks for your advice. I've seen people do this. Many people are like that, unfortunately. They say, no thank you. At the same time, you have people who face the West. What is the metaphysical, metaphorical West? It's saying, look, my aql, my intellect determines what is right and wrong. It's this rationalization, this science, right? Individualism, secularism, this pulling away from God and saying, I'm the actual core and center for everything. So you have these two sort of extremes. The Eastern sort of extreme here is represented by people who are attached to God superficially. We're godly people. We're practicing and all that, but we've got this cultural attachment too, which also becomes an idol for us. And we're going to hold on to that as well. So if you try to explain stuff to us, no. We're going to stick with this sort of blind iman, which is stereotypically what we think of, again, when we're thinking of immigrants, uncles, aunties, things like that, right? But then these youth come up out of nowhere. People in the West are like, no, it's about science. It's about our intuition and our hearts and what your intellect tells you, what science declares. That's what's true. That's facing towards the West. Again, both geographically, it's represented like that. You can see Western Muslim movements, that's how it is, these progressive liberal movements. And it's representing the metaphorical idea of West, being the individual determining, I know what's right and wrong. I know what's true and false. Something could be in the Quran, in the Kitabullah, doesn't matter to me. Whatever it says there about, rights between men and women, I don't care. Whatever it says about hijab, who cares? Times have changed. I'm going to go with what my intellect says, what science says. So these two extremes are there where Allah's saying, no, that's not what's going to determine what is good. The goodness is when you have your iman, your face is set towards Allah. That becomes your barometer. That becomes your barometer, your criterion for determining what is right and wrong. So now let me bring it to a socio-political issue that's happening right now. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We want the modern day stuff, right? We like controversy a little bit, don't we? Okay, what's the hot topic now? I think the Her Majesty stuff is gone. Sheikh Matthew took care of that. That's good. Although what a mess that was. Oh my God. So right now, the main conversation is about what's happening in Iran, right? This idea of hijab, or specifically hijab enforcement. And the death of this girl. So the conversation, again to oversimplify it, is basically split between a very Eastern mentality and a Western mentality, right? I'm using it geographically, and also I'm using it in the metaphorical, metaphysical way. Eastern mentality is, look, it's happening in an Islamic country, the ulama are there, they can do no wrong, how dare you say anything? No criticizing whatsoever. That's the way it is, no questioning. You're wrong, all propaganda, everybody's a Zionist agent, that kind of stuff. Right? That's one sort of explanation that's given. And the other is her body, her choice. How can they enforce? La ikraha fi din. My aql tells me this and all that. Like, hold on a second. There's a lot to unpack over here, right? Normally, when you see two groups coming out being these sort of major loud voices, not all the time, but generally speaking, usually these loud two groups or camps that are out there, normally both of them are wrong. That's a default principle we can rely on in every single situation, right? Something that people with at least basira and insight and wisdom should reflect on for any of these issues. Look at recent history. All the events that have been transpiring for these past few years. You can start as far back as you want. You can start with COVID, you can start with Salman Rushdie, whatever way, however far back you want to go, it's fine. And you look at how, on one side we see this society, pushing everybody, especially religious people, towards saying, look, your religion, keep it, fine, but make sure it sticks in your center, sticks in your masjid, sticks in your synagogue, sticks in your temple, sticks in your home, don't bring it outside. When you come to us and talk outside in the public sphere, you better speak in our language. Our language is a secular language. It's a liberal language. That's the way we talk about rights, human rights. So your little spiritual, soul, godly stuff, we don't want to hear any of that. So when we say my body, my choice, you better hold that flag up high. When we say love is love, you better hold that flag up high too. Right? That's what they're holding up. And that's what they're getting us to try to also say, right? You have to identify the exact way we're saying people to identify. Hey, you want to have your private beliefs? No problem, but keep your mouth closed. We don't want to hear about it. When you come outside to our public sphere, you have to talk in our language. You have to use our ideas. Right? So when you're coming here, we're forcing you to face towards the West. Face away from your God, face away from your deen, your principles, face towards us. And the Eastern way, same thing. Like, no, don't face towards them. Look at us. Look at what we're saying. Over here, it's an Islamic country, Islamic nation. They can do no wrong. It's perfect and all that. Hold on a second. On both sides, there's so many misconceptions of Islamic concepts, it's ridiculous, right? Now look, there should be some pretty obvious things. One part is we know very well that there is a concerted effort of propaganda in the media anti-Iranian. We know that it's there. Nobody's hiding that. You can read the white papers, it's there. Nobody would deny that. The mainstream media, even other alternative sources, they usually don't paint a positive picture. They will take things out of context, they'll lie, they'll spin truth, they'll push out theories that haven't been substantiated. That's what they do. And that's actually not just for international politics or Iran, that happens for local stuff too. If any of you have ever been involved in any sort of even minor local issue with the police or even something small, you see that what newspapers, even local newspapers print is usually just, everything's a tabloid. Everything becomes like the National Enquirer. Because why? They need it's entertainment, it's a story. But the idea is that why are they always pushing a certain narrative too, right? We have to at least think about that. Anybody who's taken any media class, journalism class, criminal justice class, they all say the exact same thing in the beginning, that the media doesn't tell you how to think, but they do tell you what to think about. That's how they control the narrative. They're like, look, we want you to have this conversation about private individual rights, my body, my choice, do whatever you want. How can you enforce a clothing, enforcement, a code like that on somebody? That's not right. People should be free to do whatever they want. And you see these other people, with all these memes out there that if you're upset at France banning it, you should also be upset at a country enforcing it. It's not fair. It's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. Keep your memes to yourself. It's not the same thing. Don't oversimplify the argument, right? Again, this whole conversation, you can see it starting from the beginning. Post Roe v. Wade, same thing. My body, my choice. Individual rights. All your religious, spiritual stuff, keep it to yourself. This is the line you need to follow. But again, the problem is the respondents from the quote-unquote Eastern or pseudo-religious camp is that their responses are usually really bad too, because there's no nuance there. And a lot of them don't even understand the Islamic perspective in the first place. Even again, post Roe v. Wade, a lot of people, when they were trying to explain Islam's rules on abortion, they had no idea. They said, this is the way Islam is, it doesn't allow anything else. Like, that's incorrect. These are the exceptions that Islam, most Maraja do allow, actually. Like, oh, really? Like, yeah, maybe, as Sheikh Mehdi was saying, I think in the first session on music, we're saying, instead of playing guessing games, make sure you do your research first and make sure before you start talking about all these concepts, Do the research. Ask somebody. Alhamdulillah, in this community you have more ulama than you need to go around, right? Alhamdulillah, it's a gift for you guys. It's a ni'mah and a blessing. So there should be no excuse of jahalat in these sort of issues. Other people in other communities, maybe. But again, it goes back to the other thing is why do we always feel it necessary to have an opinion and talk about every single issue that comes? If we know that they're controlling the narrative, they want us to talk about it, well, why is it? Because in every single opportunity, whenever this identity crisis is presented to us, they throw it back into our face saying, look, you've got to pick a side now. You have no other choice. Either you're part of our liberal, individual, secular movement, my body, my choice, individual rights, do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, physically hurt anybody else, or be backwards, religious, blind faith, whatever. You have to pick one of these. That's the only thing that they won't allow you to have any nuance. And unfortunately, that's how it ends up getting split in the first place. Every single conversation ends up like that. Now, many of us get caught up in that, right? And that's not the way Islamic conversations work. The fiqh, the actual Sharia, has so many nuances to it. Even if we just talk from the Sharia level, it's not that simple. Then we talk from an akhlaqi level, then it opens up more. Then we talk from an irfani level, philosophical level, metaphysical level. It opens up even more. There's a lot of conversation to be had over here. Right? So it's not that simple. I mean, think about it. If somebody has, again, this sort of position of, well, let's start with the sort of Eastern one. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. They can do no wrong. It's an Islamic country. The ulama are running it. This kind of stuff. Like, hold on a second. Are you saying that every single alim that's there, even Ayatollah Khamenei himself, the leader, whatever your beliefs are about it, put that aside for a second. Are you saying that there's zero wrong that's happening there, that there's no mistakes being made? Like, look, if that's what you're saying, then I don't think you've actually read any of the speeches by any of these ulama. Because even for something like hijab enforcement, even while I was there, it was still debated in the Hawza. That is this something that is connected to Islamic principles or not? It's not a simple discussion of Islamic law, Islamic society, enforce. No, it's not that easy. It's not that simple. And that's why you have big name scholars who say, look, we don't agree with this idea. Now, at the same point, to those who have the sort of individualistic or liberal response, like, yeah, see, we said it's wrong. Like, no. If you also believe in the notion of, let's say, democracy or a republic or whatever, if you have that belief system too, well, okay, what do they have over there? They have democratically elected pretty much everybody there. Their system of election is very similar to the federal republic that exists over here in terms of like a pseudo-electoral college. You don't have direct representation necessarily, but the way that the councils are formed is through indirect representation, indirect election. In college, there was a seminar that I attended. There was a class, it was called a seminar. It was called Democracy and Reform in Post-Revolutionary Iran. And not me, but one of the other students there, he presented a paper, and it's funny because this guy, he admitted himself that I think his father worked for the FBI or something. So from the beginning, he had a very negative perception about Iran, from the beginning in that class. So we all had to write papers at the end, and his topic was actually to compare and contrast the Iranian constitution and system of election versus the American constitution and system of election. And at the end, his own conclusion was that there's really no difference. Very, very minute. And in fact, he started praising the Iranian constitution, which was really strange. I was like, I hope Daddy Dearest and the FBI doesn't find out about that. But he was saying, because in the Iranian constitution, it enumerates certain things like it guarantees housing rights and healthcare rights and water and things like this. Now, whether they're actually doing it or not, another story. But at least they enumerated it in the constitution, for example, right? So, again, if ulama themselves in these countries are saying, look, we are discussing whether hijab enforcement as a law itself is something Islamic, or not to say Islamic, but is it the ideal method of tabligh right now or not? Should we be doing education first and then enforcement? Or should we say enforcement, but keep it more like a speed limit law? Where if you go 5 minutes, 5 miles over the speed limit, 10 miles, most cops will let you go, right? If you're flowing with traffic, fine. They'll let you be normally. I don't know how it is in Dallas, but most places that's how it is, right? Although the way I've seen it over here, it looks like you guys are going like 20, 30 as like the normal over the speed limit on some of these highways. Or if it's different wherever you go, right? So maybe some scholars say, look, maybe that's what we have to do. Let the police, whatever, or those who enforced it, this Gesht Irshad, whatever, give them the idea that, look, be a bit more lenient. You can kindly, and look, the majority of cases are kind advisement, like khanam, please do this and this. It's not these one or two or a few handful of cases that are put out and highlighted in the media. But whatever it happens, it's got to be addressed. So some scholars are saying, look, why don't we focus on early education, getting them to understand what is hijab and this and that. Then after a certain point, then maybe we can, tweak the enforcement a little bit, maybe. That's what some say. Again, there's a whole other conversation. I don't want to get into all the nitty-gritty, but just it's points for us to think about. That's all I want to offer, right? I'm not telling you which way to think. I'm just giving you points to think about. Some scholars say, look, if the people have voted for an Islamic republic themselves, right, back to this whole idea of democracy. If they said, we want Sharia to be enforced and practiced, then who is some outsider, no matter where you're coming from, to say, no, you shouldn't be enforcing? Like, well, what's it to you? You stick to your own country, let them handle their own thing. If they've got their problems, let them solve it. Right? They've got their own system. Like, oh, people are protesting. Well, yeah, people protest police brutality over here too. Occupy Wall Street came out. Sometimes protests work, sometimes they don't. Like, sometimes they're large ones, sometimes they're not. People have different systems. Oh, but there's corruption there. Okay, sure, there's corruption over here. Like, what are you trying to do? It's not a simple like tit for tat and everybody's got problems. Not the idea, but it's that, look, every single society, every single community and country, they have the sovereign right to try to take care of their own problems. But does it make sense for us to say, look, let's impose our own view and our own will on all of you people? Hey, if they don't want it, they've got a method to get rid of it. They got rid of the Shah on their own. If they really believe that it's so bad over there, then let them, do something similar. That's up to them. But, it's a longer discussion about what people really view. But again, to summarize there, you have some scholars who are like, look, we're not sure if, let's say hijab enforcement is really required or not. There's one seminar too that I never attended, but it was talking about the idea of, many of you know that there are certain websites and certain internet services which are blocked or filtered in Iran, right? Just like China does it, and many other countries do it too. Iran has certain filtering software in place. So ulama, right? There were conferences held at some of these, institutes for ulama, for scholars, tulab for the hawza, saying, okay, this idea of filtering and cutting things off, what is the fiqhi understanding of this? So these things are debated and discussed over there. There's so many things that are talked about. Usually we don't hear about those things, and it might be beneficial for us to hear, perhaps. But I guess maybe because we're so cut off, we're like, we don't know what's going on over there, so they must be stuck in darkness and they're all oppressed. Like, no, they're having conversations, they're discussing things, let them figure it out, right? We can give them some level of autonomy. They're not, they don't, this whole white savior complex sort of idea. We don't need to have to come and let's save you oppressed people. No, I don't think it should be like that. They were able to throw out a shot on their own. If they really believe that's the case now, then let them use the methods that they have and let them do what they have to do. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So that was kind of saying that, hey, people with the extreme, Iran's a utopia and all this stuff, look, some scholars there, they constantly question things like the banking system, or the way that finances are carried out there, the way that laws are being enforced. There's many things that scholars are still discussing and debating and they don't agree with, and they've publicly done that. That's nothing new. That happens, public debates happen on TV between scholars, so that's nothing crazy. Having differences of opinion is a normal thing in circles. We usually are not used to that, but over there it's a normal thing. So people who are like, no, they're perfect, everybody's fine, I don't think you're actually reading people's speeches. I don't think you have done enough research to make those comments. Even if these people were honest, they would look at the comments of Ayatollah Khamenei himself about what he said about the idea of this type of enforcement and some of the laws there and some of the mistakes that he himself claims that he's made as he's been the rahbar. Okay, so while you're calling it a utopia, why don't you actually, if you really want to follow him, right, everything he says, okay, read all the speeches properly and see what he says and comments about his own nation, right? And then maybe you can have a clear, unbiased picture. Okay, so we're done attacking the sort of Eastern mentality, now the West, my favorite one to attack. Okay, my body, my choice. You can't enforce these things, it's not fair. Hold on a second. Every society is allowed to enforce laws. Every society has a sort of enforcement, right? Obviously, no shirt, no shoes, no service. Obviously, even for the center here now, right? It's gone from, there was mask mandates that were here. Many other centers had it. Many businesses had it. I was in Pittsburgh a few weeks back. I went to a store, even at that store, still mandated. It's like, okay, people have these decisions. Yeah, you can complain and cry all you want if you're that type, fine, but put it on and go in. If you don't like it, then don't go inside. It's pretty simple. And if you have an issue, there's a channel to go and complain and debate if you really have that problem, right? But experts have decided it. Follow the experts, right? That's the whole idea. So generally speaking, people were fine with it. This idea of, okay, mask mandates, people protect themselves, et cetera, et cetera. The government has a job to protect society. And there's certain things that can be enforced, whether it's masks, whether it's a dress code, indecency, these things are enforced. Every society has that. So in that society, if they decide this is what we say is indecent, and it's not them saying indecent, what they're using is the Islamic Quranic definition of what is indecent or immoral. They're saying, hey, we've got a definition too, and if you guys are okay with putting a hijab over your nose and chin and mouth and everything, then why can't we enforce somebody putting it on their head, for example, for women putting it on their head? And for a while there was a male enforced hijab too for a long time as well. Like, okay, so why isn't a society allowed to have their own autonomy and say, we want to enforce our own laws? And just like in every other society, if somebody doesn't obey, there's different levels of punishment. There's different ways that you do that. If somebody goes over the speed limit to a crazy amount, car can be impounded, they can be put in jail, like depending on how reckless they are. Depending on the level of crime, depending on what they do, depending on how egregious they are, then there's different levels of punishment. Now, you and I might not like it, but hey, if they as a society, with their elected people, they decided that, why is it such a bad thing necessarily? Laws, we know there's nothing wrong with that. Every society has it. They have allowed for a system where it's democratically put in place. They have a parliament, they have councils and all this. They've decided on these laws. The people there, that's what they want. Yeah, some people disagree with it, but a handful of people disagreeing does not give somebody a right to just toss out the law altogether, right, and practice altogether. Even if somebody disagrees with a law, say, look, I don't disagree with I disagree with your speed limit law. Or again, I disagree with the mask mandate. Okay, fine, but know that if you don't obey, there are repercussions, and you have no reason to complain because you knew what you were getting yourself into. So if somebody performs these certain actions, they don't observe hijab in a country which has rules for hijab, why would everybody have an issue with that? Okay, they have a law. People are advised, do this, and if it's enforced, how is that different than any other country? Yes, does brutality take place? Yes, it does. Is that a problem? That's a problem. Do they have to fix that? Of course they have to fix that. Does every country have that issue? Yeah, every country has that issue. They have to work on these things. So it makes no sense for us, and it seems it's that kind of Western superiority that sometimes we have, that yes, us with our intellects and our liberal notions of free speech and freedom, my body, my choice, and all this stuff, that we have to tell people, you can't force people what to wear. No, we do force people how to speak and what they can and cannot say. Speech is controlled in every society. The question is, what are the limits? Sometimes you let a society decide. In a religious society, they say, no, we want the religion to decide. We want God to decide. And that's their right to do that if that's what they want. Again, whether that's what Islam actually wants to be enforced, again, that's a longer conversation, which I don't want to get into that. But it's at least an opinion there. If Islam has a certain dress code in mind and they want to enforce it, okay, fine. You in the West have one? Okay, people enforce it. If somebody goes out in an indecent, rude manner, you would expect the police to come and take them away. And if that person who's dressed inappropriately is being belligerent, then, if something happens to them, we don't want them to be brutalized, obviously. That's not supposed to happen. But if, while they're kind of fighting off the cops and something like that happens and they get hurt, well, something like that takes place. I'm not saying that's what happened in this instance. I don't care about the specific instant because that's still being investigated and you guys are welcome to do your own research. What I'm talking about are the actual principles here. And to take it back to this idea of cultural attachment is not simply about our culture from the East. It's any sort of cultural notion that you and I bring to Islam and try to force feed it into Islam. Whether it's Eastern ideas or it's Western ideas. This idea of my body, my choice, or I can say whatever I want, or as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, it's fine. Are these actual Islamic notions or not? Are these Quranic principles? I know everybody loves to say, La ikraha fi din. Does that mean that you can't force people to practice? You can't force people to, practice a law in society? That's not what that ayah means. It means that God doesn't force you to change your heart and your mind. That's all that ayah means. But you see, even when it comes to the Quran, people, without looking at the tafsir, they start to put in their own 2 cents. Like, this is what God means. Like, no, look at the tafsir. Every society has a level of enforcement. Just like the Prophet enforced law, just like Imam Hasan enforced law, just like Imam Ali enforced law. They enforced law too. Now, what they enforced, how they enforced it, again, those who are students of history and are interested, go research it and you'll see what they did. And see the methods that they use. And you can also see, what did they prioritize? Did they prioritize hijab? Maybe, maybe not. Because some people, that's their response too. Like, oh, I've heard a lot of some of these speakers saying, you'll never find an issue of the Ma'sumin enforcing hijab there. Okay, well, was it an issue there though? Were there Muslims not practicing it? So then, if that wasn't an issue, of course you're not going to find somebody enforcing hijab if nobody was not wearing it. Because it was part of the culture too. So why would you look into a society that was pretty much okay with doing it? They had no issue there. Why would you go and search for evidence that you're not going to find, right? It's like a loaded sort of, there's like a little bit of evidential bias that's going in there. So I don't think it's like the proper question to ask. The idea is, did they ever enforce any sort of law at all? Was there anything within Islam that they caught people doing in public and they said, no, you can't do this? And the easiest example, again, now I'm really helping you out in the research. I shouldn't be doing and spoon feeding you, but especially when it comes to the way the bazaar was handled, especially Imam Ali alayhi salam, the way he was in the bazaar, right? We have famous narrations where he's walking around with either a stick or a whip, checking people to make sure they weren't, being fraudulent. Making sure, how some people would take the nice fruit, put them at the top, and keep all the dirty, rotten ones at the bottom, right? This sort of falsely advertising your items. And he would go and he would, what he would do, again, you can go and research that, but there's a reason why every society has a police force, and every society has a SWAT force, and every society has a National Guard. There are levels to enforcement. That's what's going to happen. It's not something that's only relegated to, it's only you religious people. No, every society enforces their laws. We have a set of laws. Iran, they're trying to enforce, at least what they believe, it's a set of Islamic laws. Even if you don't agree, at least we can in principle say, look, they're an Islamic country, they're trying their best, they're making mistakes, sure. Are they trying? It seems like they're trying. Are there mistakes? Yeah. Does it make sense for us to air their dirty laundry and to shoot them down? I don't know if that's the best thing. I don't know if that's really necessary. If we had a fellow mu'min who was running an organization or running a business, and there were some issues in their business, there were problems, whatever, would we go and start spreading that out to non-Muslims and everybody else? No, wait, there's a certain level of izzat that other mu'mineen have that we have to protect, right? Famous narrations say that the izzat of a mu'min is greater than the izzat of the Kaaba. Right? The heart of a mu'min is more important than the Kaaba itself. And that has to be protected. So, yes, we can disagree. You don't agree with the ideology over there? That's okay. But there's still ulama and mu'mineen. There's a hawza there. It's a long history of people. You have Bibi Ma'suma buried there. You have Redha, all of these shuhada, all these, you've gone for ziyarat. There's something different there. It's not just some random oppressive regime. We have to be careful of the sort of phraseology that we use, the terms that we use, and the sort of negative perception that's there. I'm not saying that they are free from criticism. No, we can discuss and we can criticize, sure, but first to figure out what's the motive behind it and why is it that everybody right now and recently wants us to start to criticize it. So these are things that I think are worth thinking about in our own circles. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. This hadith that I wanted to share again, this is from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Because we're running out of time, I'm just going to skip the Arabic. He says that the most ghafil of people are those who don't take lessons from the way that the dunya changes in every single instant. The changing of the dunya, تغير الحال الدنيا إلى الحال الآخر. It's like when people are not reflecting on this and taking lessons, he's like, these are the most ghafil people. Now, some use this hadith and say, see, society is progressing and changing, we have to change with the times. That's not what this hadith is saying. It's saying, take lessons. One lesson is that just because there's technological progress or scientific progress, whatever that means, doesn't mean that we learn objective reality and truth from them too. Right now, what scientists and progressive sort of movements are pushing for is that there is no objective reality. That's the sort of idea, right? Whatever you want to identify as, there is no gender, basic biology is going out the door now. And then you're going to see slowly more and more things will be tossed out. Their idea is that there is no truth, so we're just going to give you a bunch of random ideas, whatever makes you feel good, right? The whole idea of postmodernism, that's what you follow. This is what this sort of corrupt institution of academic science and philosophy, that's what it's led to. So we have to be very careful and see that when people are not established with some sort of deen, whether it's Islam or Christianity or Judaism, some sort of objective reality, you're opening the floodgates to go to chaos. That's the way it works. If you don't have a place, again, Allah saying here, what in Surah Baqarah, ayah 177? Don't look at the east, don't look at the west. Face towards Allah. Have iman there. Allah, through the Quran, through the Ahlul Bayt, they're giving us a system, a criterion, a barometer for what is true and false. That's what we have to understand. When we get that, all these little minor issues that we encounter in our life, international, domestic, community related, they'll all be easy. Because we'll see, it's the exact same thing. They're all just symptoms of a greater spiritual disease. Everything will be like that. Oh, so-and-so is happening. This is happening. Okay, we know that issue. That's an ego issue. We know that there's a spiritual ego problem. That has to be solved. This is just a symptom. That's a symptom. Oh, what about this? What about this? Oh, that's because people are becoming too individualistic. That's not a serious issue. What about this? No. Quran has addressed that. This is because people are not following the concept of wilaya. Right? These things have been addressed. The principles are there in the Quran. They've been mentioned by the Ahlul Bayt. You can look through there and you'll see, inshallah ta'ala. The last point that I want to make before we end, as we've talked about two sort of negative points in terms of the analysis of the story. One of them was about the mistake of Juwaybir, which we said was this su'adhan bir-rizq, negative perception, being negative, pessimistic about his rizq, which is because of his negative perception about fellow mu'mineen, mu'minat, and unfortunately to God himself. The second thing we said is Ziyad himself was mixing Islamic practice and belief with some cultural notion that he had to, which we have to be careful of. Whether it's Eastern culture or Western culture, we have to make sure we're following this pure understanding of Islam. And that sometimes requires us to think at what they say, a higher order, metacognition, higher level of processing. Think about your thinking. Why did I come up with this idea? Why do I believe this? What's my reason? Can I trace it back and source it to the Quran and Ahlul Bayt? Or is it something that I heard from some pundit? Or did I see it in some meme? Or it was something that was catchy? Where did I actually get this truth statement from? Right? We have to be able to source it back. The final point, which I think is a positive point, is Ziyad ibn Labid, how did he change his mind? What first made him change his mind? It's his daughter. His daughter is the one that comes to him and says, look, Dad, you're making a mistake. Rasulullah gave you an order. I want to follow that order. If he said, Rasulullah ordered that I should marry him, then I'm going to marry him. So the last point, which I'm not going to open up because we're out of time, but the idea of how important our households are, how important tarbiyah is, and very specifically how we raise our daughters, for those of you who have daughters, is incredibly important. It's the daughter that is coming to the father, this elder, this elite, and is saying, no, Dad, what you're doing is wrong. You're incorrect here. I disagree. You have to go and fix it. A lot of us would say, how dare she speak to her father like this? But no, she's firm in her Islamic beliefs. She's firm in her Islamic identity, and she's able to do that. And Ziyad wakes up because of it. So look at the relationship between them. Is that Ziyad himself, with obviously it's probably more of the mother than Ziyad, probably, right? Has influenced and trained the daughter to such an extent that her values are strong, where she is now able to do mu'izzah and nasiha to her own parents. That's what we need to train our kids for, not to get to some level that we think is good. They should be better than us. That's what we should be shooting for. I want my kids to be able to advise me when I make a mistake. This was a couple of days ago. I was having a bad day. I wasn't on my best behavior. And our youngest, our 2-year-old, I was in the kitchen. She came running out. And she had her tongue out like, Daddy, I was like, oh no. I was like, oh my God, what did you eat? What did you do? And then I was like, okay, show me what you do. So she took me to the bathroom, and I saw soap everywhere. I was like, oh God, she ate soap. Oh boy. And, I was overwhelmed, I got triggered, whatever it was. I just lost my cool, and I lost my patience. I shouldn't have been screaming and yelling, and I ended up doing it. Our eldest heard me. She was upstairs. She heard me, speaking in a raised voice. She came running downstairs and says, Daddy, why are you yelling? And then, me thinking what I'm doing is rational. I'm like, oh, she ate soap, and that's disgusting. She's going to get sick. I'm going on and on. And my, this anger, and this redness and this fire is still there. And I'm screaming, like, oh, could you do this? What's wrong? It's a 2-year-old. I should have known better, but I didn't in that moment. And my daughter, 7 years old, I was like, Daddy, she's a baby. What are you doing? She's 2 years old. Daddy, she doesn't know better. And I'm like, he's like, Daddy, why was she alone in the bathroom in the first place? I was like, Abe yaar. He's like, Daddy, why weren't you watching her? I was like, you have a point there. Yeah, that's right. I'm like, sometimes when you train your kids too well, then it comes back to bite you. But that was a moment of reflection for me. I'm like, yeah, that's my fault. Why am I yelling at her? I'm the one who allowed her this. I opened up the floodgates, or the soap gates, whatever you want to call here. I'm the one who allowed this. I should have been, more careful instead of letting her go off there. But she was able, at such a young age, she understood her principles, and alhamdulillah that, my wife's been able to train our daughters like this, where they're able to say, no, what you're doing is wrong, and I don't think you should do that. And you shouldn't, speak to, your other kids like this. That's a wonderful trait. We want to raise our kids in the exact same way, where they're firm in their iman, and they can speak to us like that too. That's the way we want them to be. A lot of us say, no, they need to be, do ita'at, do obedient, show me ihtiram. Sometimes the way they show ihtiram is by being disobedient. Because if the obedience is to Allah primarily, then when you are disobeying, when you're making a mistake, they should call you out for that. Say, look, you're not on that path towards Allah right now. You're degenerating and deviating a little bit. I'm going to help you come back. And we know that the 3 phases of kids, right? 0 to 7, they're the masters. 7 to 14, then we can lovingly start to formalize their education and their tarbiyah. And then 14 and above, they say that they're like a wazir. Wazir can mean different things. It can mean advisor. And some say, no, it actually means a representative. Somebody that you trust so much that they are an extension of you. That everything that they say should be what you want them to say. That there's no difference between them and you. So that, just like a king and their closest advisor or wakil, they could say, hey, king, queen, whatever, we're calling you out because that's not a good idea. You shouldn't be doing that. That's the way you should be raising our kids. If we give them that foundation from a young age, very young age, the 0 to 7 is the most crucial thing. You lose that, it's very tough to make that up. 0 to 7 is done solid. 7 to 14, you start to cement that with, the more fundamentals. Again, always with love. Never that, like I say, Hitler Islam, right? Don't be so harsh and everything. And then 14 to 21, even earlier for a lot of kids, you'll see them bringing you higher and higher towards Allah. They'll raise you higher and higher, just like the daughter, Dhalfa, was able to do with Ziyad, her father. There's other points I wanted to mention about family stuff, but I'll leave it over here, inshallah. As we end, I just wanted to quickly summarize first. Our discussion was about how we take the notion of the Prophet, of larger-than-life characters like the Prophet, and think about making big changes, getting involved in big projects and big things, which sometimes is great, but sometimes it makes us lose the small things, right? Losing the trees for the forest, that sort of idea. And in that, we forget that the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, the way they were able to change everything in a grand scale was because of these one-on-one things. Now let's go back and look at the story. Through a few individuals, through Juwaybir, through Ziyad, and through Dhalfa. Only 3 players in this story. After all of this, what happens? Individually, all their lives were transformed and changed. Juwaybir himself was somebody who was poor, who was nothing, right? Living in the masjid, homeless. Had this negativity. Rasulullah changes his life. He breaks him out of that, gets him married. Ziyad, stuck in his cultural ways, right? His ego is a problem too. His daughter breaks him out of that. His life now transforms. He doesn't go back now. He enriches the life of Juwaybir. Now, and then later on we have stories. Juwaybir became one of the most wealthiest people in Medina and started helping out other families too. He created a system of wealth just from this homeless individual, right? It's one thing to give somebody like $5-10, whatever, go get a drink. It's another to say, I'm taking you from poverty to independence, right? There's a whole way, the whole discussion about the Ahlul Bayt, how they did that. They took somebody from one social class to the highest social class, right? One by one they did that. And when those people reached those levels, they paid it forward. Not buying the next guy Starbucks, whatever. That's not paying it forward, right? Paying it forward is saying, look, I'm in this high position. I'm going to bring you up socially as well, too. I'm going to bring everybody up so we're all independent in that same way. And that's the way that the Prophet did with this person. And Dhalfa herself, her test right there, which she passed right away, was the Prophet gave an order. Is your ego involved? Are you going to say, oh, maybe we're not going to click. Maybe there's no chemistry between me and this, Sudanese homeless guy. No, she said, Rasulullah ordered it. That's it. Sami'na wa ata'na. I hear and I obey. This is a lesson for us, right? For the highest level of destroying the ego, there is no my opinion, I think, whatever I want. No, it's saying when Rasulullah, when the Ahlul Bayt, on behalf of Allah, when they give us orders, that's what we follow. However difficult it might be. We know that what they're doing is for khair, it's what's good for us, so we follow it in the way that she did. And these individuals, besides them, each individual, their lives are transformed. Besides all of Medina being changed because of the way Rasulullah infected each of these individuals, the tribal mentality, the economic status of all these people. This story now has broken the barriers of time, and now we're hearing it right now, and it's given us something to think about in every single one of these regards. All this is like a story for us too, and it's playing out that, hey, which one of these do I sound like? Or which one of these do I want to take as a role model, like before or the after, all these things. So even there, it can cause, right now for us, transformation. The same way, all of these different stories, especially Karbala, that it's not something limited to history. It's something that each and every single individual there, every player, whatever side they were on, every single one of them had a specific story that you and I recant over and over again. We're talking about it. We're remembering it. Why? Because it's giving and showing us a little bit of what might be within me. Well, I want to have an Abbasi element to me. I want an Akbari element. I want to be like Qasim, or I want to be like Zainab, or Farwa, or Layla, or all these grand personalities. I want to be like them. But if I'm being real, maybe I've got a little bit of hur in me. Even that might be a bit of self-deception. Maybe it's probably more shimmer that's in me. I've got that piece in me. Maybe it's more of the Umar ibn Sa'd that's in me, that knows right from wrong, but I love the dunya too much. I love materialism. So I'll blow off Islam and what I know to be right because I like the way things are in the dunya. Or maybe it's like even these other individuals, like the Kufans or other people who regretted. They were crying, they were shedding tears. They said, if only this, if only that. Imam Sajjad clearly tells them in Kufa, your tears are meaningless now. You had your chance, you had your opportunity, your tears don't mean anything. We know you now as people of betrayal. And so these stories, they remind us that the tears, the azab, everything we do, in and of itself, it has value. But that value is that it's a pointer, one, to Allah, to the Ahlul Bayt, to the values they stood up for. But more importantly, it's to point a finger back towards ourselves, to say, which one of these stories and dimensions do I have to focus on within me? Which one of these people in Karbala do I have to look at their character? Which spiritual quality do I keep on a pedestal and look after and say, I want to be like that? Or say, no, I have characteristics like these enemies and I have to get rid of that. This is the power of Muharram, of Azah. And this is what we should be continuing on year after year after year. And before we move on to the Masa'ib, I also wanted to just quickly thank the community for the kind invitation, for allowing me to be able to end this, although we continue on to Rabiul Awal, but ending off the month of Safar, of Azadari in this sort of formal way. It's an honor and a privilege always for me to come to this community. I always make new friends and new connections every time I come. There's always wonderful discussions and questions that people bring up, and I really do benefit from that. Whatever beneficial things were said in these past 2 nights, all khair from Allah, so we thank Allah for any single thing that we've been able to benefit from the teachings of our ulama that we're able to share here. Anything which is incorrect or confusing or which wasn't explained properly or may have offended you, all of that is from me, and I ask for your forgiveness and the chance to hopefully correct that either now, later on tonight, or at some point in the future, inshallah. And I hope to see all of you again sometime, inshallah, in the future. Whether it's here in the community, maybe we go together for ziyarah, maybe you come together to Orlando, and then we are able to host you there. Inshallah ta'ala, may Allah be able to make us benefit from one another in the future, inshallah ta'ala. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We are commemorating and remembering the Masa'ib of Rasulullah, of Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Redha. And in the beginning of our discussions, we talked about these grand, amazing titles that we give these individuals, right? Rahmatun lil Alameen, Insan wal Kamil. Imam Ali's Abu Turab. Imam Hussein, Sayyid al-Shuhada. All these great titles. But sometimes these titles are not ones that give us happiness and make us proud and have this iftikhar in Ahlul Bayt, but it's one that sometimes these titles, names, break our hearts. When we think of Zainab as Ummul Masa'ib, I said, Ya Zainab, what sort of Masa'ib did you witness and see? So much so that even Hussein is not called Abul Masa'ib. You are Ummul Masa'ib and no one else. We say, Ya Hussein, you are ghareeb, definitely. But for your grandson, Imam al-Redha, he is ghareeb al-ghuraba. Oh, what a title that is. Why is he ghareeb al-ghuraba? Ya Rasulullah, we remembered your last moments last night. Rasulullah, you of course knew what was going to happen to your ummah after you left. You narrated the story of what happened to Imam Hussein and what was going to happen to him. You told us about what would happen to Imam Hasan and the way that the people would deal with him. And we remember Imam Hasan and how many of the Imams, all of them, many of them were given these harsh types of poison. The poison that affects Imam Hasan is so strong that they say that he was coughing up parts of his body, parts of his liver, coughing up blood constantly. And they say that he had a bowl on the side of him where he was resting, and every time he had to cough up, he would take this bowl and he would cough up the blood, and these little body parts of his organs, he would cough it up into this. But whenever he would hear the footsteps of Zainab or Kulthum, he would tell people, run up, hide that bowl under the bed. I don't want our sisters to see this. I don't want them to see what I've been going through. I don't want their hearts to break like this. Ya Hasan, you want to hide this sort of musibah from your sisters, but what happens when your tabut goes out, when your janazah goes out? What do you want? You want to be buried with Rasulullah. You deserve that. You deserve to be buried with him. As your tabut and your janazah is being carried to that direction, you see these munafiqeen. These individuals are shooting arrows at your tabut one by one, that as you're going towards Rasulullah, now they have to change directions and go back towards the house. They place it back down. Abbas and Hussein are there taking arrows one by one out of the tabut of Imam Hasan. And one narration says Zainab comes there and she grabs some of the arrows and begins pulling them out. And Abbas says, Zainab, this is not for you. This is not something that you should be doing. He says, no, Hasan is my brother too. I have the right to do this. Zainab, what will you do when you see the arrows in Hussein's body? Will you have that same opportunity? When you see that Hussein has so many arrows in his chest that when he falls on the ground, that his body is not even able to touch the sands of Karbala. These arrows act as a stand, keeping him away from the sands of Karbala. Zainab, what will you do when you see all of this? When we think about our Gharib al-Ghuraba, Imam al-Redha, we say, why is he Gharib al-Ghuraba? Why not Imam Hussein? Imam Hussein was also taken away from his place. He was in Medina. He was pulled away. He's buried in a far off land. There was nobody else there in Karbala. We would say, yes, we understand, Imam, it was so difficult. But Imam, Ya Hussein, with all due respect, you were allowed to give your final salams to your son, Imam Sajjad. You gave your final salam to Zainab. You gave your final salams to Sakina. You were able to hold her. You were able to let her sleep in your godi one more time. You were able to do all of this and go out onto the battlefield. You at least had that opportunity. But they have this one narration where they say when Imam Jawad was younger, when he went with his father, Imam Redha, they were on Hajj. Imam Jawad was sitting as a young child one place. And they say when it was time to leave, one of the helpers, one of the Sahaba tried to pick up Imam Jawad and say, it's time to return back to our home. Your father is saying we need to go back. Imam Jawad refused to move. He refused to get up. Then they called Imam Redha. They said, your son does not want to go. Imam Redha comes and asks his son, Ya Bunayya, how come you're not leaving? Why are you refusing this? He says, Baba, when I saw you doing tawaf, it looked like you were doing tawaf for the last time. The way that you were going around the Kaaba, I could tell that we will never see each other again. This was a tawaf al-wida. This was the final time you would ever be in the Kaaba. I know that look. And he doesn't know really that in a few moments, in a very few short moments, then Ma'mun will order that he be taken away, and Bibi Masma will never see her brother again. She will never get that final salam. Imam Jawad will never be able to see his father again. The Ahlul Bayt, the people who are protectors of the Imam, their Imam is taken away from them. Imam is gharib. There's no supporters around him. He's surrounded among his own Shias in Khurasan, but even they can't come to him. There's nothing for him. And the worst, mu'mineen, mu'minat, azadaran, this is the final point. When Imam al-Redha is in his final moments, when Ma'mun gives him this poison, when he's there, they say that the poison was so strong that Imam al-Redha began to lose his balance. And because there was nobody there to support him, he was looking left and right, just like Imam Hussein. Hal min nasirin yansurana. But over here, when the poison started to take control of his body, they say Imam Redha fell backwards. And one of the companions later, when they said, Ya Gharib al-Ghuraba, Imam Redha, I wish I was there with you to catch your body. But what can I say? You were only with Ma'mun in your final moments. على لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمري. ماتم حسين.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. निकला था जनाजा जो घर लौट के आया है, निकला था जनाजा जो घर लौट के आया है, निकला था जनाजा जो घर लौट के आया है, निकला था जनाजा जो
گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو کس کس طرح سے آل کو، کس کس طرح سے آل کو امت نے ستایا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو کس کس طرح سے آل کو، کس کس طرح سے آل کو امت نے ستایا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو ہے زہر نے ٹکڑے کیے شبر کے جگر کے، ہے زہر نے ٹکڑے کیے شبر کے جگر کے، ہے تیروں کا بادل تو تابوت پہ چھایا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو ہے زہر نے ٹکڑے کیے شبر کے جگر کے، ہے زہر نے ٹکڑے کیے شبر کے جگر کے، ہے تیروں کا بادل تو تابوت پہ چھایا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو ہے فاتح خیبر کو لے آئے بنا قیدی، ہے فاتح خیبر کو لے آئے بنا قیدی، ہے بنت محمد پہ دروازہ گرایا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو مولا حسن کے چوم کے لب کہتے تھے احمد، مولا حسن کے چوم کے لب کہتے تھے احمد، ہے ان لبوں سے جگرے حسن دشت میں آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو مولا حسن کے چوم کے لب کہتے تھے احمد، مولا حسن کے چوم کے لب کہتے تھے احمد، ہے لبوں سے جگرے حسن دشت میں آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے، نکلا تھا جنازہ جو کربل میں میرا بھائی دے اکبر و اصغر جب، کربل میں میرا بھائی دے اکبر و کرنا قاسم فروا کو بتایا ہے نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے نکلا تھا جنازہ جو کربل میں میرا بھائی دے اکبر و اصغر جب کربل میں میرا بھائی دے اکبر و اصغر جب قربان کرنا قاسم فروا کو بتایا ہے نکلا تھا جنازہ جو گھر لوٹ کے آیا ہے نکلا تھا جنازہ جو یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا امام یا حسن یا حسین مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی سینے پہ جو شاخ پلی سینے پہ جو شاخ پلی جس کی عبارت میں جلی جس کی عبارت میں جلی منہ پر تمام جو بے نشان مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین وہ عابد بیمار تھا وہ عابد بیمار تھا چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا اور شام کا بازار تھا اور شام کا بازار تھا تھی مصطفیٰ کی بیٹیاں مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین 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 محمد وآل محمد صلوات
السلام علیک یا رسول اللہ السلام علیک یا خدیجۃ الکبریٰ السلام علیک یا امیر المؤمنین السلام علیک یا فاطمۃ الزہراء سیدۃ نساء العالمین السلام علیک یا حسن المجتبیٰ السلام علیک یا سید الشہداء بکربلاء یا ابا عبداللہ السلام علی الحسین وعلی علی ابن الحسین وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين وجميع الشهداء ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليكم يا أئمة المعصومين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي السلام عليك يا حجة بن الحسن القائم المنتظر المهدي مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان من شر الشيطان يا شريك القرآن يا خليفة الرحمن يا مظهر الإيمان كعبة الإسلام إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وظهوره واجعلنا من خير أعوانه وأنصاره وأشيعائه والمستشهدين بين يديه السلام عليكم جميعا معصومين والأنبياء والمرسلين ورحمة الله وبركاته